Tonight on Primetime, after 2 weeks of intense fighting, the United States and Iran have paused military strikes, but few believe the crisis is over. Tehran insists it remains in full control of the Strait of Hormuz, rejects direct talks with Washington, and says it stands ready to respond if attacked again. Can the pause be a new beginning for diplomacy? Welcome to the program. I'm Andy Mioch. Iran says it is still in control of the Strait of Hormuz and is not seeking peace talks with the US, despite a pause in hostilities following nearly 2 weeks of strikes. Washington says the aim is to give space to diplomatic efforts. The pause in fighting comes amid rising military costs and casualty numbers.
For the first time in 13 days, the Pentagon has halted its bombing campaign against Iran. United Nations Ambassador Mike Waltz confirmed the pause is for negotiations, reportedly timed to allow an Omani delegation in Tehran to discuss reopening the Strait of Hormuz, but the decision also reflects severe military constraints. Defense sources say top advisors, including Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane, warned the president that the US is exhausting pre-selected targets and draining critical air defenses across the Middle East. The numbers highlight this strain. The US has already fired more than 1,200 Patriot interceptors, each costing more than $4 million. This comes as the Defense Department updates its casualty statistics, reporting 642 US military casualties, including 18 deaths, since the large-scale operations began on the 28th of February. Tehran has reciprocated the pause, though officials insist their strategy remains attack for attack. Army spokesperson Mohammad Akraminia says the US failed its objectives and Iran remains fully prepared. Backing that claim, an IRGC commander says Iranian forces have already struck nearly 300 US targets regionally, allegedly destroying 11 aircraft at the Jordanian base. However, Tehran views the pause as a tactical delay. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghaei confirmed indirect messages via Qatar and Pakistan, but ruled out formal talks. He accused Washington of a third diplomatic betrayal over a 14-clause agreement, declaring Iran's sovereignty the absolute priority. Beyond Iran, Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei says securing Lebanon is a prerequisite to end the wider war. Meanwhile, Israel and Lebanon prepare for US-brokered talks in Italy on August 4th to coordinate Israeli withdrawals.
Meanwhile, Iran has strongly condemned Ukraine's deadly strike at a commercial ship in the Caspian Sea as an illegitimate act of aggression. Tehran rejected Kyiv's claim on linking it to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. A News' Turah Shiralelu reports from Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Iranian Foreign Ministry slammed Ukraine's attack on a cargo ship in the Caspian Sea, which claimed the life of one sailor and left several seamen wounded. A spokesman Ismail Baghai said Ukraine's move was illegitimate and contrary to the United Nations Charter and international accords. He added that other littoral states have also expressed their deep concern. He stressed to Kyiv that Iran will respond appropriately. Speaking at a weekly press conference on Monday, the Iranian official also urged the government of Bulgaria to reconsider its decision to allow US military to use its airports. He said that Tehran has been aware of Sofia's role in supporting the US military, warning that it will turn Bulgaria to an accomplice in the Israeli-US war crimes. He was asked about London's agreement to allow US B-1 bombers to launch attacks on Iran last week. Baghai said the new UK government is endangering the regional security. He said if the British government is concerned about the status of the Strait of Hormuz, it should understand that the waterway was open prior to the Israeli-US war on Iran. The Iranian official also confirmed that Tehran and Muscat at the weekend discussed how best to manage the strait, as both countries are on either side of the corridor. A spokesman Baghai also announced that the French ambassador to Tehran was summoned to the Foreign Ministry on Sunday to express Iran's strong protest over undiplomatic activities of its embassy staff. He also criticized Washington for what he called a double standard in dealing with Iran's civilian nuclear program after its deal with Saudi Arabia, stressing that Tehran will never forego its rights under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Turaj Shiralilu from Iran's Foreign Ministry for A News.
Well, joining us now from Washington to talk on what might follow the pause in hostilities is geopolitical analyst Henry Rogers. Henry, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here on Primetime. Now, after 2 weeks of sustained military exchanges, why would you say that both Washington and Tehran chose to pause?
Well, look, when we look at this pause right now, we have to understand why both sides are entering into this recent escalation of the conflict. Both sides want to apply military and economic pressure against each other to gain more leverage at the diplomatic table, as that's the eventual pathway and exit strategy for both sides. So when we look at the US and its escalation, and Iran and its escalation, we have to understand that Iran is matching the US and its escalation, pushing back against the Trump administration, but being careful on its own to not further escalate the economic pressure, as it fears that if it does that too far, it may include or incur incursions from third parties such as China and Russia's recent pressure against it outside the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meetings last week. So this recent pause is fueled by the US finding its escalatory period to no longer have the efficacy that it has had over the 2 weeks, looking forward to diplomatic talks. And then Iran, in turn, following in the US's setting of the tone, because it also sees diplomatic talks as the path forward.
When it comes to this matching, there's one other area, that is the Strait of Hormuz. Obviously, Iran says it's closed for business. The U.S. is at the same time maintaining its naval blockade of Iranian ports. Which side has more leverage right now over the waterway?
Well, I'd argue neither side has the leverage it needs right now, and that's why we've seen this recent escalation and kinetic action, because the Iranians continue to say that they have maximum control over the strait. They've been attempting to work with the Omani government on a command and control capabilities over it to charge tolls or further control, but it does not have the capability to monopolize the strait in that way at this moment. It has the capability to menace the strait using munitions striking from its coastal provinces that it controls. The US, on the other hand, does also not have the ability to monopolize the strait, having the ability to strike Iranian targets on the other side of the strait, minimize Iranian capabilities to strike the strait. However, it will never be able to fully deny Iran's ability to launch missiles at ships passing through the strait, just because of the world we now live in, the era we live in, where the ease of transporting, selling, manufacturing low-level drones and munitions that can strike ships at short distances, including this strait, which is a relatively short waterway width-wise. So I'd say neither side has the full control that it needs, and that's why we're seeing the escalation right now.
Well, when it comes to munitions, we've seen reports in the U.S. that concerns over the rapidly depleting stocks of air defense interceptors influenced this decision to implement a pause heavily. Whatever the case may be, would you say that the United States is ready to resume an all-out war?
The United States has the capability to resume full strike packages against Iran. The efficacy of those strike packages is continuing to dwindle as American intelligence on different strike targets continues to dwindle. But throughout this conflict, we've heard this story and we've seen this story of dwindling interceptors, which is a major problem for the US and its security defense capabilities in the Middle East, but also in its other theaters that are of high value to it, whether that's the Trump theater, Trump's new theater of war against drug traffickers striking boats off the coasts of South America and the Pacific and the Atlantic, or the previous historical theaters of Europe and Russia, Taiwan and China. In our new drone age, drone interceptors continue to be vital munitions. So I believe that that is at the forefront of what the Trump administration understands with this pause, and is a large part of why it's seeing this recent escalation period of 2 weeks has reached its peak efficiency of what it's going to be able to capable and the amount of pressure it can achieve against the Iranians.
And Henry, is there now a risk of another unexpected escalation now that Ukraine hit an Iranian ship in the Caspian Sea, because Tehran says that will not go unanswered?
Look, Ukraine striking the ship in the Caspian Sea is very much a lifeline for Iran. As we see the US and Iran become embattled in this conflict over the Strait of Hormuz, striking vessels, attempting to seize control, Ukraine being in a conflict, being a US and NATO supported country in its conflict, striking vessels, striking its vessel, it's a diplomatic rhetoric that Iran can now use to say, look, other people are striking vessels, other people are striking our vessels that are trade vessels and waterways. This is a double standard, and have its case seen on the global stage, attempting to gain diplomatic concessions from its people within its territory, but then also political concessions within its territory, and then diplomatic concessions from states and actors outside its territory, pushing that narrative of, oh, this is happening other places. So it's very much right now at a rhetoric stage, a signaling stage for Iran to gain diplomatic value. However, that jump to an escalation is relatively minimal. Iran gains little from widening the conflict on a Ukraine front, while compared to widening the conflict on an economic front with, say, the Houthis or strikes against Saudi and Gulf oil export capabilities, as we've been seeing over the last few days.
Well, now that you mentioned that the Houthi imposed blockade on Saudi ports is still in effect, how much can that impact the broader US-Iran confrontation? And do you expect both sides of the Arabian Peninsula to be blocked? And if so, what happens then?
I don't expect both sides to be fully blocked. We have seen a full blockage in the Strait of Hormuz. However, right now the Houthis can gain, and the Iranians can gain the pressure they need by just blockading Saudi exports that are happening out of Yanbo and are going through that Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They get to apply economic pressure against those energy exports that are vital for the global economy and the US and its allies without fully blockading the waterway and then incurring third-party pressure because of that full global economy slowdown. Not to mention, by just threatening Saudi ports, you increase the insurance premiums for all shipping passing through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, slightly raising that economic pressure. So I believe that is a massive detriment to the US. And we've already seen the Houthis start striking and threatening ships, but now strikes against that east-west pipeline, which is really vital for Saudi oil coming from where the Strait of Hormuz exports used to be to Yanbo, to the Red Sea. And that in itself, striking that infrastructure within Saudi Arabia, is a major escalation against the US, its global economy, and its allies' global economy.
And on another front of this war, where Israel is combating Hezbollah, we've seen the US mediating talks between Beirut and Tel Aviv. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is due to meet Donald Trump in the coming days. What are your thoughts on this particular part of the conflict?
Well, look, over the last 24, 48 hours, Khomeini has worked very hard to make it clear that the Lebanon dynamic, the Lebanon-Israel front, is a part of the larger conflict, and that any peace agreements will be involved in that. And the U.S. has responded in kind. We had Netanyahu over the last 24, 48 hours discussing with his cabinet how the U.S. how the U.S. is starting to apply more pressure to those peace talks. The U.S. is starting to discuss the withdrawal of Israeli forces because we've seen the pilot programs with some Lebanese armed forces taking territory from the Israelis. We've very much seen a stalemate start to manifest with Israeli forces in the south of Lebanon continuing to exert control over those territories. However, both Hezbollah and Israel right now do not want to see a full resumption of escalation. Israel has an upcoming election, and while Netanyahu benefits a lot from being seen as that strong candidate, that tough, hard-on regional rivals candidate, the Lebanese also, while he does benefit from being perceived in that strong man, strong pro-conflict candidate, a full resumption of hostilities and body bags returning home, especially because of the efficacy that Hezbollah had been having recently with drones and its ability to strike Israeli tanks and armored vehicles, is not in their best interest with this election coming up. Hezbollah has obviously been weakened by the conflict. It needs some respite. It needs some rest so that it can recalibrate, build up its capabilities. And then the Lebanese armed forces, the Lebanese government, of course, wants stability so it can continue to grow its control in the vacuum that's starting to happen because of a weakening Hezbollah. So all sides, all parties want a continued de-escalation diplomatic off-ramp. The real question is the U.S. and Iran going to be able to apply pressure to make that happen, or are the Iranians or U.S. going to attempt to use that theater for pressure? It is at this time that we continue to see de-escalation. However, both sides may change their mind as the Iranians continue to use a strategy of rotating in different proxy groups, whether that be Hezbollah, the Houthis, the PMF in Iraq, to apply different types of pressure against the U.S. and their allies.
Henry, thank you kindly for joining us on Primetime and sharing your analysis.
Thank you very much.
All right, after a short break, Volodymyr Zelensky is in the UK as Russia and Ukraine continue exchanging strikes, with London expected to reaffirm military support for Kyiv. Don't go away. Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has arrived in the UK for talks with the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham. The pair are due to visit a naval base and meet the 200-plus Ukrainian military personnel and sailors undergoing training with British troops. Talks are expected to prioritize funding and technology, including drone deals and new electronic jammers in development. Burnham has pledged unwavering support for Ukraine and warned Russia that Britain will not back down until a, quote, long-lasting and just peace is achieved. Following his meeting with Burnham, Zelensky is also expected to travel to the United States for talks with President Donald Trump on Tuesday.
And attack the administration that is trying to prevent the...
Well, joining us now from New York to talk on the latest surrounding the Russia-Ukraine war is John Kavalik, senior editor at Issue Insight. John, welcome. Always great to have you on the program. Let's start with Zelensky's UK visit. It's the first one by a foreign leader since Burnham became prime minister. What message would you say this sends?
Optically, it reminds of the United States-UK relationship, the special relationship. And usually when a US president takes office, the first visits that are usually commenced are Canada, our largest trading partner and generally closest ally, and then it's usually the UK. So in this particular instance, because of the coincidence of Senator Lindsey Graham's death a week ago, the funeral or the memorial service tomorrow, President Zelensky was able to make this work. And for Andy Burnham, it shows that maybe there's a new special relationship that's going, eastward rather than going westward. So for President Zelensky, a good moment. For Andy Burnham, he's able to show, the gravitas that comes from being prime minister. However, there is still a tremendous funding problem in the UK. And so Prime Minister Burnham is going to have some challenges with this unwavering support for Ukraine. The money just isn't there to do everything that the previous government, Prime Minister Starmer, promised to do, and the governments before that. So there's going to have to be some reckoning with this.
Well, it's a busy week for Volodymyr Zelensky. He's also set to meet U.S. President Donald Trump tomorrow in Washington. What can be expected there?
This is going to be, it's a timely meeting. You have Prime Minister Netanyahu also going to Washington for this memorial service. They're both going to be meeting with President Trump. There is some talk that maybe those meetings will coincide, one coming in, one coming out. And President Zelensky has always tried to foster a relationship with the state of Israel, specifically because of the military capacity that Israel has. And Ukraine has always tried to get some help from Israel. So it might not be surprising if they get together, or whether it's in the White House or another place before one or both of them leave. But for President Zelensky, the big challenge for him is going to be one of ego. He feels confident right now because of the impact that the homegrown military might of Ukraine is having on Russia, where the Ukrainians are hitting deeper, they're hitting more civilian oriented assets, they're making life more difficult for the Russian people. And so he's feeling pretty good. The allies of Ukraine are feeling pretty good. President Trump has said Ukraine's doing well. But what President Zelensky needs to be careful of is not push too hard. And he tends to do that either when he's feeling when he's feeling a lack of confidence, or when he feels a lot of confidence. And in this case, he's just going to need to be very, very careful about demanding too much, because saying we're on the cusp, we can win this thing. Because while President Trump likes winners, he also likes strength. And President Putin still represents to President Trump the type of strength, even if there are issues with Ukraine doing damage to Russia. President Trump still admires the strength that President Putin projects, the ability of him to do what he wants to do. And so President Zelensky shouldn't make the mistake that all of a sudden President Trump is souring on President Putin and he's all in President Zelensky's corner.
And John, would you say this newfound confidence of Volodymyr Zelensky contributed to those strikes in the Caspian Sea? Over the weekend, Kiev says it struck vessels used in military cargo shipments involving Iran. Tehran said that would not go unanswered. Is there now a risk of these two wars overlapping?
Well, they sort of have during the last 5 years. And a lot of times, we see the optics, or we hear what someone says, and, we get excited. We're into year 5 of the expanded Russia-Ukraine war. And Russia, from the beginning, has been using assets delivered by Iran, whether it's drones or the Shahed drones, or it's the technology for those drones that Russia is now using and building within Russia. So Iran in some respects has been a junior version of what Belarus was on the 24th of February 2022, when Russian soldiers went from Belarus south toward Kiev. So it's not a big surprise. The question though becomes, what can and what will Iran do? And there isn't an awful lot they can do that is going to truly impact Ukraine. But what Iran needs to be careful of is that Ukraine now has an ability to fight back using much longer range projectiles than they had 5 years ago, 4, 3, 2, or 1 year ago. And so, I think that it's going to be more bluster, because Iran's got its hands full with the US, with Iran, with the other Gulf states internally, also their relationship with Russia. So I don't think President Zelensky is going to be missing any sleep wondering what Iran's going to do.
And domestically in Ukraine, Kyiv appointed a new military chief. Do you expect the dissatisfaction within the society over the firing of the defense chief to subside?
Fedorov was an impressive young man, and the fact that he had this transition early on from the digital guy. He was basically the guy that was behind the teams that digitalized everything about Ukraine, whether it's paying your bills, whether it's voting, just do whatever you were going to do. They digitalized it, and it was impressive how fast they did it, how comprehensively they did it, how low cost they did it, because major industrial countries, including the U.S., we don't have what they've developed. And then he becomes defense minister, and he's sort of the guy. He can relate to everyone. People can relate to him, particularly young people in Ukraine. And so his dismissal, basically, President Zelensky saying, I have a choice between the old warrior and the young warrior. I'm a young president with no military experience, so I'm going to stay with the old guy. It didn't go over well, and he had to get rid of the old guy. And now he's got a newer sort of middle-aged guy, but younger people want the young guy back. This isn't over for him. Like most heads of state, they usually will try to, when there's a domestic issue, they will try to go foreign. So go on a trip. President Nixon used to do that. And President Johnson. It's a tried and true for presidents and prime ministers. You got a problem at home, get on your plane and go look presidential. And so President Zelensky, this memorial service for Senator Graham and the meeting with President Trump couldn't happen at a better time, because it just sort of put some space between he and the protesters. But the protesters are likely not going to, it's not going to subside in a material way. Most importantly, though, it projects on President Zelensky's potential candidacy for re-election. And it makes that candidacy less and less likely, in part because the former defense minister Fedorov, he's held his ground. President Zelensky has said, well, I won't make you defense minister again, but I'll make you something else. Maybe we'll create something so you'll be happier. And he said, no, I'm only coming back if I get the job that I was good at. And so this isn't over. And I think that the unhappiness will continue. You're going to see more and more in the Rada, the parliament, more and more sort of distancing from President Zelensky. And the media within Ukraine is getting more robust, talking about corruption issues. So I think this is going to have a very important impact on President Zelensky as we move forward toward a presidential election.
John, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight.
Thank you.
All right, after a short break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev says freezing the conflict between Russia and Ukraine could create an opportunity to end the fighting. Speaking during talks with Russia's Vladimir Putin in Omsk, Tokayev said the two sides should return to negotiations under an updated version of the Istanbul framework, but he ruled out Kazakhstan acting as a mediator. Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha has thanked Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev for urging Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop the war. He shared his response in a post on X, describing it as a realistic, timely and wise message. He was referring to remarks Tokayev made on the 25th of July during talks with Vladimir Putin in Omsk. The Kazakh president said he had viewed it not as a civil war but as an interstate conflict from the very beginning. He also stressed that Kazakhstan respects the Ukrainian people, their culture and their language. Tokayev proposed considering a freeze in the conflict and the return to a renewed Istanbul formula. He said previous talks in Istanbul had produced significant results. And according to Tokayev, the next step could be a peace agreement backed by guarantees from the major powers. The Kazakh president also stressed that Kazakhstan does not intend to act as a mediator. He added that no one knows how to resolve the conflict because the parties continue to hold different positions. Tokayev described freezing the conflict as a mechanism that has been used in international practice before. However, the Kremlin rejected Tokayev's proposal. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that, according to Putin, freezing the conflict was impossible given Ukraine's stance. He added that Moscow intends to achieve its stated objectives. Peskov also said the fighting could end before the end of the day if the Ukrainian side made what he described as the necessary decisions. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Russia has tightened its migration policy yet again, introducing new financial requirements and stricter regulations for foreign workers. The measures are expected to affect around 6 million foreign nationals, the majority of whom are labor migrants from Central Asia. Sevil Rajapova has more on that in Tashkent.
Foreign workers living in Russia will now have to show they earn enough to support themselves and their dependent family members at or above the regional subsistence minimum. This is a new law from President Vladimir Putin for labor migrants. Authorities will verify the income should tax and employment records. The legislation also requires foreign workers to make advanced tax payments for themselves and their minor children when applying for work permits, with non-compliance potentially resulting in payment cancellation and the requirement to leave the country within 15 days. A separate law also increases state fees for application for Russian citizenship, temporary and permanent residency, while employers will pay higher fees to hire foreign workers. The latest measures are expected to affect around 6 million foreign nationals currently living in Russia, most of them labor migrants from Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, who together account for overwhelming majority of Russia's migrant workforce. The legislation follows a series of tighter migration rules introduced over the past 2 years. Earlier this month, Russia made pre-registration through the RUID mobile application, which is mandatory for citizens of visa-free countries entering for work or other temporary purposes, including those from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Travelers now must submit their details electronically before arrival and obtain a QR code to enter the country. Despite the tighter controls, migrant workers remain vital to sectors including construction, transport, logistics, and public services, while Russia continues to face persistent labor shortages. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Afghanistan and Uzbekistan have reaffirmed their commitment to expanding economic cooperation after Uzbekistan's Deputy Prime Minister Jamshid Hojayev led a senior delegation for talks in Kabul. Tamim Bahiz reports.
Uzbekistan's Deputy Prime Minister Jamshid Hojayev and a high-level delegation met with Prime Minister Mohammad Hassan at the Presidential Palace in Kabul. They discussed ways to deepen cooperation across a range of sectors. According to the Prime Minister's office, Hojayev described Afghanistan as an important partner in Uzbekistan's foreign policy and said that delegation's visit was made on the instruction of President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. He said Uzbek exports to Afghanistan reached $150 million last year, while exports have already totaled $111 million in the first 4 months of the current solar year, expressing confidence that bilateral trade will continue to grow. The Uzbek Deputy Prime Minister also announced that 5,000 visas have been issued to Afghan citizens this year, with further steps underway to simplify visa procedures. Meanwhile, in separate talks, Afghanistan's Minister of Transport and Civil Aviation and his Uzbek counterpart agreed to launch the practical work of a joint technical team to improve transport links, facilitate transit and ease visa procedures for commercial drivers. Uzbekistan also pledged greater access for Afghan transit vehicles. Also, discussions with national companies and the National Development Company focused on expanding trade and investment, increasing exports of Afghan fresh fruits, advancing the Trans-Afghan project, strengthening textile industry, and supporting infrastructure development. Uzbekistan also announced plans to purchase 100,000 tons of Afghan cotton and cooperate in supplying fertilizers, improved seeds, and other agricultural support. The meeting highlighted growing economic ties between Kabul and Tashkent, with both sides pledging to strengthen trade, connectivity, and regional cooperation. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
In Georgia's Kutaisi, the country's former parliament building has been given a new life. It now houses a technology hub, opened this week by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Economy. Nini Nikolashvili has more on that in Tbilisi.
Prime Minister Irakli Kabakhidze and Economy Minister Mariam Karaishvili cut the ribbon on the new technology hub in Kutaisi, set fittingly inside the building that once held Georgia's parliament. Old walls, new purpose. Inside, an AI computing center, a science and technology museum, and a branch of TUMO, the creative tech education network already running in more than 20 countries. There is also a technopark, Georgia's largest, built to run incubators, hackathons, and training programs non-stop all year. Economy Minister Krivishvili framed it as a statement of intent. Georgia, she said, doesn't just want to use new technology, it wants to build it. And Kutaisi, she argued, has already earned the spot: a working international airport, a young university, and now this. It is a local story, but it lends against a much bigger backdrop. Separately, Georgia has spent years chasing a bigger ambition, turning itself into a digital hub linking Europe and Asia, with plans for submarine data cables tying the two continents together. The Kutaisi hub is not formally part of that connectivity push, but both point in the same direction. A country betting that geography plus a bit of infrastructure adds up to relevance. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Turkey says the United States has approved the export of engines for its homegrown Khan fighter jet, a move that could signal a thaw in defense relations between the two NATO allies after years of strain. Washington, however, has yet to publicly confirm the decision. Adam Morrow reports from Istanbul.
Turkey says the United States has approved the export of General Electric F-110 engines for serial production of its domestically produced Khan fifth-generation fighter jet. If confirmed, the move could mark a significant step in improving defense ties between the two NATO allies. The announcement was made over the weekend by Turkish aerospace CEO Mehmet Demirolu at the Farnborough International Air Show in the United Kingdom. Demirolu said Washington had cleared the export of the U.S.-made engines following a review process, removing a key obstacle that had clouded the future of Turkey's flagship combat aircraft program. U.S. authorities, however, have yet to verify the approval, and neither the State Department nor the Pentagon has issued an official statement. But if confirmed, the decision would be one of the clearest signs yet that defense cooperation between Washington and Ankara is beginning to thaw after years of friction. Relations deteriorated in 2019 when Turkey purchased the Russian-made S-400 air defense system, despite repeated objections from the United States. Washington responded by imposing sanctions on Turkey's defense procurement agency and expelling Ankara from a U.S.-led multinational F-35 fighter jet program. U.S. officials argue that operating the S-400 alongside the F-35 could compromise the aircraft's sensitive technology. Although the sanctions remain in place, bilateral defense ties have shown signs of improvement in recent months. Washington has approved the sale of F-16 fighter jets to Turkey, while President Donald Trump has signaled his willingness to readmit Turkey to the F-35 program if outstanding issues involving the S-400 are resolved. If confirmed by Washington, the reported engine approval would mark another milestone in what appears to be a slow but steady reset of U.S.-Turkey defense ties. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at other top stories of the day. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has asked Russian President Vladimir Putin to help resolve issues linked to Russian restrictions on Armenian exports. The measures have affected key Armenian exports, including food, drinks, and agricultural products. During the call, Pashinyan said the restrictions contradicted the legal framework governing Armenia-Russia relations and Eurasian Economic Union regulations. The EU has also pledged 18 million euros as part of a 52 million euro package announced in early June and eased export rules for Armenian goods. The Kremlin readout of the phone call between the two leaders says that Putin raised the issue of Yerevan needing to hold a referendum on joining the European Union and replacing the Eurasian Economic Union. Ruben Vardanyan's name has resurfaced in a new Russian court case, renewing scrutiny of a career spanning high finance, regional politics, and criminal proceedings. The latest development adds another chapter to a record already marked by offshore networks and serious allegations.
Russia's Supreme Court has prohibited the transfer of funds to DigiMarket, a $35 million offshore company linked to Ruben Vardanyan. DigiMarket provided financing for the DoubleTree by Hilton hotel project in Moscow. In the spring of 2026, it was transferred to Russia's special offshore zone in Kaliningrad. On July 24th, ownership of the company was transferred to Vardanyan's wife, Veronika Zonnebend. The decision comes as legal proceedings continue over efforts to recover more than 5 billion rubles, or around $64 million, from the borrowing company. The case has brought fresh attention to Vardanyan's long-standing links to offshore finance. Those links stretch back nearly 2 decades to Troika Dialogue, the investment bank he founded. The company later came under scrutiny in an investigation by an international investigative groups. According to reports, some of the offshore companies used proxy owners to conceal their true beneficiaries. The network moved billions of dollars out of Russia and was also used to launder criminal proceeds and hide their origins. Investigations also showed that Vardanyan and members of his family received money through the network. More than $3.2 million reportedly covered payments on Vardanyan's American Express card. Money also went to accounts belonging to his wife and family and paid school fees for his 3 children in Great Britain. Vardanyan denied direct involvement. He said the offshore companies created by Troika served his own businesses as well as the bank's clients. Further questions later emerged over Solway Investment Group, a Swiss-based mining and metallurgy company. Vardanyan later moved from Russian finance into regional politics. In 2022, he renounced his Russian citizenship and relocated to Karabakh. He became state minister of the so-called unrecognized Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. According to Azerbaijani security services, Vardanyan facilitated the funding and operations of illegal armed groups in the region. He was later brought to trial in Baku. The Baku military court sentenced Vardanyan to 20 years in prison. He was convicted under several articles of Azerbaijan's criminal code. The charges included crimes against peace and humanity, war crimes, terrorism, and the financing of terrorism.
Azerbaijan has officially launched preparations to host the inaugural FIFA Under-15 World Cup and Festival this year. FIFA's Council Bureau selected Azerbaijan to host the first ever edition of the tournament, which will take place from October 22nd to 31st. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev signed a decree outlining the measures needed to organize the tournament, assigning the existing committee for the 2027 FIFA Under-20 World Cup to oversee preparations for the new event. The event marks a new addition to FIFA's youth competitions and is expected to bring together some of the world's most promising young footballers. Credit ratings agency Moody's has reaffirmed SOCAR's investment-grade credit rating, giving it a stable outlook and maintaining the rating the company first secured in 2025. The decision comes despite global economic uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, and energy market volatility, reinforcing investor confidence and strengthening SOCAR's position in international capital markets.
We are pleased that Moody's has reaffirmed SOCAR's Baa3 long-term issuer rating with a stable outlook, confirming the company's investment-grade credit profile maintained since its initial upgrade last year. The decision provides further evidence of SOCAR's financial resilience, solid credit profile, and strong standing as a reliable partner in international capital markets. It also reflects international recognition of the company's long-term financial discipline, prudent financial policy, and the measures implemented to support sustainable development.
Azerbaijan's media development agency has announced restrictions on the activities of two Iranian state media outlets, citing what it described as reciprocal measures. The decision follows Iran's designation of several foreign media outlets, including Azerbaijan's state broadcaster AZTV, as hostile media organizations. The agency said the move is based on Azerbaijan's media law, which permits reciprocal restrictions when another country limits the professional activities of Azerbaijani journalists. It also accused the two Iranian outlets of acting against Azerbaijan's national interests by, quote, spreading propaganda targeting the country's sovereignty, constitutional order, territorial integrity, and national security. In other news, the Democratic Republic of Congo says the number of confirmed Ebola cases has increased to more than 3,000, with more than 1,400 deaths confirmed. Authorities say they are stepping up their response as neighboring countries tighten border health checks.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is stepping up its response to Ebola cases as patients continue to arrive for treatment, prompting fresh efforts to encourage earlier medical care. Prime Minister Judith Suminwa Tuluka said during a visit to Kisangani in the newly affected Chopo province that late presentation was making treatment more difficult. She said the government would strengthen community training and awareness campaigns to encourage people with suspected Ebola to seek medical care earlier. The government has also allocated $50 million with priority given to laboratories, medical equipment, community surveillance and patient care. It comes as the outbreak has now breached more than 3,000 confirmed cases, including more than 1,400 deaths. The latest national figures follow the integration of harmonised databases from the eastern provinces of Ituri and North Kivu. The Health Ministry says the increase includes previously uncounted cases and does not solely reflect newly reported infections. Meanwhile, neighbouring Tanzania has stepped up preventive measures at key transport hubs. At Kigoma Lake Port, health teams are carrying out temperature checks using thermal scanners before passengers disembark, with anyone showing an elevated temperature taken for secondary screening. Kigoma Airport has also introduced temperature checks and hand sanitisation for all arriving and departing passengers, while foreign travellers must provide detailed personal information. Uganda, Rwanda and Zambia are also strengthening border health screening and tightening entry controls to help contain any potential spread of the virus.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching and join us again tomorrow. From all of us here at A News, have a very nice evening.